Hey everyone, and welcome back. You've probably heard all the buzz about the stock market taking a bit of a hit lately, right?
Yeah, things have been a bit rocky for sure.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Yeah.
We're talking Dow Jones, the S&P 500, even the Nasdaq is feeling the pressure,
And it's not just the stock market.
right? We're also seeing those oil prices creep up.
Even crypto is getting kind of pulled into the mix.
Yeah, it seems like everything's connected these days. So today we're going to unpack how these U.S. tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, those new tariffs everyone's talking about, how they're impacting the global economy
And
and your wallet too. So buckle up.
it really is wild how one policy decision can have such a ripple effect throughout the whole global system.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction. So let's break this down, okay? First up, the tariffs themselves. We've got 10% on Canadian energy, 25% on Chinese goods.
And those new taxes on all the stuff coming in from Mexico.
Right. So can you explain to our listeners, like, what exactly is a tariff and why do governments even use them?
Well, a tariff, you can think of it almost like a tax,
Oh,
but specifically on imported goods.
okay.
And governments use them for a bunch of different reasons. Sometimes it's to protect their own industries, or sometimes it's a way to try to, get a better deal in trade negotiations.
So it's not just about, like making things more expensive for us when we go to the store. There's like a whole strategy behind it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of strategy involved.
Okay.
But the way the market has reacted,
Yeah.
maybe not so strategic. We saw the Dow drop 1.1%. The S&P 500 fell 1.7%, and then there's the Nasdaq. That one tanked over 2%.
Wow.
Now, those numbers might not sound huge on their own,
Right.
but it's a signal that investors are starting to get a little nervous.
They're like hitting the pause button.
Yeah, it's like everybody's kind of holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next.
Okay, and what about the US dollar and crypto and all of this? They usually seem a bit more, independent, don't they? Like they do their own thing.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But the dollar's been all over the place, and even crypto, which usually just kind of marches to the beat of its own drum, even that's getting caught up in all this global anxiety.
Huh. So it really is like a global thing.
It really is. But what I think is really interesting is how other countries are starting to fight back.
Oh, yeah.
Like, take Canada, for example. They didn't waste any time.
Right.
They immediately retaliated with their own tariffs on U.S. goods, a total of $105 billion worth.
Wow. That's a pretty bold move. So we've got Canada on the offensive. I'm sure Mexico's probably gearing up to do something similar. And then, of course, there's China, the big one.
Yeah, well, China's approach has been a little different.
Yep.
Their currency, the yuan, just hit record lows.
Hmm.
And a lot of analysts see that as them basically getting ready to launch their own counterattack, probably with their own tariffs.
So everyone's just throwing tariffs at each other.
It's exactly what we call a trade war. And
Oh.
trust me, nobody wins in a trade war.
Okay, so trade wars are bad. We get it. But how does this all actually affect me? Like the average person just trying to live their life? I got to start budgeting for tariffs now? Like, how does this actually hit my wallet?
Here's how to think about it. When imported goods get hit with these tariffs, they become more expensive.
Okay.
More expensive for businesses to bring in. And guess who ends up footing the bill for that?
The consumer.
Exactly.
So that means like my morning coffee is going to cost more, my new phone, groceries.
And it might not just be like a few cents here and there.
Right.
We could see this seriously disrupt entire supply chains
Wow.
for things like cars, steel, aluminum, even medicine.
Oh, wow.
All those industries rely on that global trade.
Right.
And these tariffs, they just throw a wrench in the whole system.
And I'm guessing this is what has economists worried about the possibility of recessions, especially in those countries that rely so heavily on trade with the U.S., like Canada and Mexico.
You got it.
Yeah.
Both those economies are deeply intertwined with the U.S. economy. They depend on selling stuff to us, and these tariffs are a huge shock to their systems. Some experts are even saying if these tariffs stay in place, it could actually trigger recessions in both countries.
Okay, that's kind of scary. So not only could my grocery bill go up,
Yeah.
but entire countries could be pushed into recession because of this. This is starting to feel a lot bigger than I initially thought.
It is a big issue, and here's the thing. It's not as simple as just us versus them. The U.S. economy could get hurt, too.
Oh.
How? Our businesses also face higher costs and disruptions to their supply chains.
I see.
It's like this global web, When something like this happens, everyone feels the tug.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so if I'm someone who's invested in the stock market,
Sure.
should I be like running for the hills right now? What do I think?
let's not panic.
Okay. Okay.
Panicking is never a good investment strategy. What you need right now is caution and
Oh.
information. The market's going to be a bit rocky for a while, at least while this whole situation plays out. Keep an eye on the news, and if you're feeling unsure, don't be afraid to reach out to a financial advisor.
Right. Good advice.
They can help you navigate things.
Okay. Deep breaths, deep breaths.
Yeah.
So what about diversifying my portfolio? Is that still a good idea, even with all this craziness going on?
Diversification is always a good idea.
Okay.
It's like they say, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right?
Right.
By spreading your investments across different types of assets, you're less vulnerable if one area takes a big hit.
Yeah. Well,
It's like building yourself a financial safety net.
okay, that makes me feel a little bit better, so we're not all doomed.
Not at all. But we do need to be smart about things.
Right.
Pay attention, talk to experts, and remember, diversification is your friend.
Okay, solid advice. So we've talked about the immediate impacts of these tariffs, but what about the long-term effects? Could this trade war actually change how the entire global economy works? That's what we'll be exploring when we come back, so don't go anywhere. We're back, and, amidst all this talk of economic doom and gloom, I can't help but wonder, could this tariff thing, could it actually be a wake-up call? Could it force us to rethink how we do things and maybe even lead to some positive changes down the road?
It's an interesting way to look at it. For decades, we've kind of been operating under this assumption that free trade
Right.
and this global interconnectedness are always good for the economy. And in a lot of ways, they have been.
Yeah.
But what this whole trade war thing is highlighting are the potential downsides of that interconnectedness. It's like, what happens when those connections become vulnerabilities?
Exactly. Like when countries become too reliant on each other for like essential goods.
Right.
Any disruption to that flow.
Huge ripple effects.
Yeah, for sure.
And this whole situation is making us really reconsider that balance,
Yeah.
between being globally integrated and having a strong, resilient economy.
At home.
At home, yeah.
Okay, so
So are we all going to end up retreating into our own little economic corners? Is that what's going to happen?
that's kind of what I'm wondering. Like, is this going to lead to everyone just being like, nope, we're on our own?
It's too early to say, for sure.
Right.
But I think it's more likely that we'll see a shift towards like a more balanced approach to globalization.
Okay.
So you might see countries focusing more on strategic partnerships, diversifying their supply chains, maybe even bringing some production back home.
Okay. That actually sounds pretty sensible.
Right.
But wouldn't that make things more expensive for the average person?
Right.
Like if we're not always getting the cheapest goods from all over the world.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
There could be some price increases.
Right.
In the short term, at least.
Right.
But it's important to remember that those cheap goods often come with hidden costs.
Like what?
Think about the environmental damage,
Oh, yeah.
exploitation of workers in some cases,
Right.
and even the weakening of our own industries here at home.
Right. Yeah. You don't really think about all that when you're just looking at the price tag, do you? Okay, so it's really about finding that sweet spot, I guess, between affordability and sustainability.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
So this whole trade war thing, it's a wake-up call,
Yeah.
for sure. But what can we actually do about it besides, not panicking about our investments?
Right. Well, remember, we talked about diversification being your friend.
Yeah.
That applies to more than just your investment portfolio.
Okay.
Think about diversifying your own life,
Mm.
your skills, your resources.
Okay.
This might be a good time to explore ways to be more self-sufficient.
Like how?
Well, that could be anything from learning how to fix things yourself
Yeah.
to growing your own food even, supporting local businesses more.
Those are great ideas.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling a little less helpless.
Good. And remember, knowledge is power.
Right.
The more you understand about what's happening,
Yeah.
the better equipped you'll be to navigate all these changes and make choices that work for you.
It's absolutely well said. So we've talked about some of the downsides of this trade war and a few potential silver linings, but are there any upsides? Like, could this actually lead to some really cool new innovations? That's what we'll be talking about after the break, so stay with us. All right, we're back. And before the break, we were talking about how this trade war could actually push us toward a more localized, less globally dependent economy.
It really makes you re-examine those assumptions we've had about globalization.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, for so long, the thinking was that free trade and interconnectedness were always good, automatically good for everyone.
Right.
And they have brought some benefits, gotta acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But this trade war really highlights those potential downsides.
Yeah.
Especially when those connections we've built, they become vulnerabilities.
It's like we've been putting all our eggs in one global basket.
Exactly. And when countries become too reliant on each other
Yeah.
for essential goods and services, any little disruption can have this huge domino effect.
Yeah. Makes you think.
So this situation is forcing us to rethink that balance, between being part of this global system and having the strength to be more independent.
So instead of just focusing on getting the absolute cheapest stuff from wherever in the world, we start thinking about making things closer to home, even if it costs a bit more upfront.
Yeah, that's the idea. And there might be some price increases in the short term, that's true,
Right.
but those super low prices often come with hidden costs.
Yeah, what kinds of hidden costs?
Well, think about the environmental impact of shipping things all over the planet.
Oh, right.
The potential for workers to be exploited in some cases,
Yeah,
and even the way it can end up weakening our own industries here at home.
it's true. You don't always think about that stuff when you're just comparing prices.
It's easy to overlook.
What I find really interesting, though, is how this trade war could actually lead to new innovations.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned a resurgence in local manufacturing
Yeah.
and a renewed focus on sustainability. Can you tell us more about that?
Imagine companies bringing production back home to avoid those import taxes.
Okay.
Suddenly, there's this boom in domestic manufacturing, creating new jobs,
Right.
boosting the local economy.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, this shift encourages a focus on sustainability.
Okay.
We start thinking about ways to rely less on fossil fuels,
Right.
source materials locally,
Okay.
create more durable goods that last longer.
It's like we're being forced to evolve.
It's a chance to rebuild our economy in a way that's better for people and the planet.
That's a really cool way to think about it. But let's be real. Change can be kind of scary, and a lot of people are worried about the economic fallout from all of this, especially with economists talking about potential recessions. How do we stay hopeful when there's so much uncertainty?
There's definitely a lot of anxiety out there. It's understandable.
Yeah.
But remember, even when things are tough, people are incredibly adaptable. We find ways to support each other, come up with new ideas, create new opportunities.
Well,
This situation reminds us that we're not just passive players in this global economy. We have choices.
yeah, we do. So instead of just waiting to see what happens, we can be proactive and start making changes now.
Exactly.
What can our listeners do to prepare for this new economic landscape we're heading into?
Well, we've talked about diversification.
Right, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
That applies to your investments and your skills.
Right, having different skills.
We've talked about supporting local businesses and being more mindful about how we consume things.
Yeah.
But maybe the most important thing is to stay informed.
Okay.
Pay attention to what's happening in the news, read different perspectives. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Great advice.
The more you understand, the better prepared you'll be to make good decisions for yourself and your family.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening. We've gone from market meltdowns to talking about all this potential for positive change. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But it reminds us how connected we all are and that our choices matter.
Our choices really do have a ripple effect.
So by staying informed, engaged, and being open to adapting, we can navigate all this and maybe even create a more resilient and sustainable future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the crazy world of global finance.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious and stay empowered.